When you stop practicing gratefulness, you start destroying life. I wanted to find Christ. I wanted to find that Christ figure. And that's part of our human condition. And it was an understanding for me of, oh, right, well, how about pointing the finger back at yourself? And which is what I believe Christ was trying to do. Look, I can't change this world on my own and get out there and change the systems necessarily. But the way any good that I can do is going to come through my own very personal relationship with life in every moment of every day. Grief is such a crucial part of our humanity and the acceptance of life and death, but of love also. Love of life and grief go hand in hand. Almost like living with a broken heart, I have found, is part of saying yes to life. They come hand in hand. And without that flow and almost brokenheartedness and acceptance of these grief-sodden days, for me personally, that's why I feel also the loving response, the true response, and the action in a way comes from the right place, being in touch with my humanity in that way. It's easy to think, well, I shouldn't be able to still enjoy life while there's so much, there's this pandemic sweeping the world and so much suffering. It's so easy to then kind of deny oneself the very thing that you need most, which is saying yes and keeping that connection and actually feeding that love affair. May we take it forward and keep stepping humbly out there and finding our way. Well, we've gone straight into it, Chad.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chad with the Urban Achievers Podcast. This will be the first episode of the new season. I have some great guests lined up this year, and the conversations you'll be hearing in the months ahead were wonderful to record. I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. My guest today is Jerome Patrick Flynn. Here in North America, he's probably best known for his portrayal of the sellsword character Bronn in the award-winning HBO series Game of Thrones. Or perhaps you know him from his appearance in Netflix's Black Mirror, or the 2019 action thriller John Wick Chapter 3. What perhaps isn't so well known about Jerome, and is the focus of the conversation you're about to hear, is his life behind the camera. It's there where he's traversed a decades-long path of activism, animism, and mindfulness. Jerome's life took a dramatic interior turn while on a meditation retreat in India in the early 90s. Since then, he's been a committed student of meditation and mindfulness, and he continues to strive for a deeper understanding and expression of what it is to be an authentic human on this planet at this time. Born in the United Kingdom, Jerome became a vegan when he was 18, though in his words, slipped back into vegetarianism before a full return to veganism 6 years ago. He's a passionate animal rights and environmental activist, serving as ambassador for multiple charities, including the Global White Lion Trust, Viva, Tree Sisters, World Vision, Mindfulness in Schools, and Yes to Life. I had the great fortune of meeting Jerome while on a pilgrimage to the farm of Stephen Jenkinson in Ottawa last spring. It was there we saw firsthand the atoning example of death feeding life, working in the hot sun during the day, and then later lamenting, and with open hearts and minds, weaving those examples into the parables that Stephen shared. This conversation is an expression of what that time meant to Jerome, as well as the difficult work he's endeavored before and after. Now, given the difficult times we're in, it's impossible for the gravitas of this conversation to not be informed by the sweeping changes COVID-19 has imposed on a global level. We spend a great deal of time reflecting on what this pandemic is asking of us as a species and as a culture, but moreover, what has largely been ignored up to this point. Indigenous leaders from around the world have been begging the dominant culture, those largely divorced from kinship with Gaia, to closely examine what is defined as normal. What Jerome calls the colonizer mindset has remained the dominant force, exerting manifest destiny through endless growth, consumerism over stewardship, and progress over limits. As people awake to a new world we're met with a fork in the road. While our political leaders are steadfast to go back to normal, Jerome and I wonder about the possibility of creating a new normal, one where we no longer turn our backs to those humans still living in concert with the landscape, where we can adopt some of the wonderful innovations this time has provided to us, but perhaps do so in a way that honors and walks a little more softly on the holy ground beneath our feet. Now more than ever, we're obliged to be present to and informed by all the death that has fed us up to this point. We may be on the take right now, but our time is going to come, and it's one of the few absolutes entrusted to each of us. Jerome was kind enough to share about 2 hours of his time with me, and though in so many ways we only scratched the surface, I want to thank him for the time and vulnerability he afforded me in this interview. I've decided to split it up into 2 separate episodes, and today you're going to hear the first half of my conversation with him. I'll leave you with this before we move on to the interview. As long as we move forward with our hearts open, informed by love and by grief, we can perhaps begin to live in a way that remembers that old kinship with the world, where we aren't at odds with it, but instead unique appendages of it. Thank you for your patronage. I'll leave you to the conversation at hand.
Streets are emptier today. This kingdom lost its way, watching bodies break as they try to turn the page.
Hey, Chad, nice to check in with you over the water.
Absolutely.
Over the airwaves and over the water.
Yeah, it seems to be, it doesn't matter if you were 5 minutes away or 5 hours away or 15 hours away. Everything's kind of over the airwaves right now. It's very strange times we're living in. So
it is indeed. What can you say? The most extraordinary, unusual days of our lives, I would imagine, in many senses, certainly as a collective.
Yeah, absolutely. I had heard in a recent interview just the speculation that at least with anybody that's in a position of power right now, this is something no one's ever experienced during their lifetime. So it's very curious to see how things turn out. So,
or even those of us who aren't necessarily in a position of power.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's so many things, isn't it? It's so many things, and every day feels like so much for myself personally. So much passes through me, waves of different emotional responses to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But for sure, amidst all the tragedy of and sadness of the lives being lost and affected by the virus and the terrible circumstances kind of related to it, I also do feel like it is an extraordinary opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
for us to stop, and that we've been given, and that it's a card that nature has handed us.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, at least. There is all sorts of stories about where this virus came from.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, it matters less where it comes from, more that there is a huge gift to be taken in it.
Yeah.
But we can get into that. I'm off. You could, if I'm not careful, I could just go on one and we'll be lost in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully my heart. Hopefully some of my heart too. But
yeah. if nothing else, I think it gives us an opportunity to take pause and take a look at the way that we as a collective have been running our lives, and the way that we've been walking on this planet thus far. And maybe over the course of time that we're chatting here, we can break into some of that and either directly or indirectly reflect on that a little bit, I guess. So
I think that would be wholly right to do. Exactly. Yes. Absolutely.
So, Jerome, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how we came to this point of being able to chat today. So, so you're
wow.
And we've established both by your dashing accent as well as the reference to over the pond. You're from the UK. So yeah.
Is this a dashing accent to you guys over
the
there?
cat? It is. The cat's out of the bag. I've always wondered that with British folks. Do they hear American accents and feel the same way, or really anybody that has a different accent? But I know there's something uniquely about that regalness of the British accent that's admirable, I guess.
Admirable.
If nothing else, it's cool. So.
Oh yeah, you guys seem to like it, which is nice. It's funny. I spent my youth trying to get away from the well-spokenness. I was brought up in a family with my parents were both actors, so they'd been to this Tirada, which is the main kind of Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, where the accent used to get beaten out of you, and so my parents were even though we weren't kind of born into much money or class, really. It was I'd come home from school kind of from this quite rough school, dropping my R's and my T's, and they'd be trying to get me to speak properly. So but it's much less like that. I think an accent now, when you're acting, I like to have an accent if I can, because it takes me more away into a character and away from myself. But yeah, don't know about dashing. Yeah. So, but yeah, I was lucky enough to be. I mean, to be brought up in a very loving family in a very beautiful part of the countryside, the English countryside, and which backed out onto fields and woods, our little cottage there. And that was very much the backdrop, this kind of bohemian, very loving family, and then some relatively wild nature. Although technically there's hardly any true wilderness left over this way, but still it was such a gift to me, and I didn't know, because I was brought up with it. I didn't know quite how lucky I was to have that to escape into. Nearly every day I would go out and just climb trees and make camps and play with my brother out there and feel very, very at home. Out there in the woods.
I too had the opportunity to grow up on about 25 or 30 acres of, I guess to me at that time, or in retrospect, it was wilderness or relatively close to nature. But like you said, what is wilderness? There's a really good book. I believe it's Nature, the way it was, the way it once was, or something to that degree. I'll have to add that in the show notes. But he breaks down the stuff that we see, that we think of as the wild, that we think of as the woods. Much of that is not old growth forest. I mean, these are things that was planted by humans hundreds of years ago, granted, but how far really do we take it back?
Yes.
And that gets in some really interesting discussions when they look at things like reintroducing wildlife populations. But the population has been so radically altered, not only by man, but just by the predation of other animals. So, but for all intents and purposes, I mean, it sounds like on your end, on mine as well, we had the opportunity to have a warm contentment, I guess I'd say, being in nature, being in what you could argue our natural environment. And it's not until you get into the rat race of the city and maybe you lose touch with that stuff a little bit, that when you go back you realize just how fortunate you really were. I know that's been my experience. So
Me too.
I've been fortunate to kind of return back to trying to tend a landscape and be a good steward to the land that I'm temporarily occupying. So
I can relate. I can relate to that. Yeah, totally. And it's something that, despite my upbringing with so much nature around me, it's something that's very much with me at the moment. It's like realizing I'm only, in a sense, due to still being brought up in the world and with all the also since I was a kid, what has the momentum of kind of materialism and globalization and what comes with that, and the amount of distraction from our nature, from our connection with nature is so huge and responsible for the very precarious situation, where we've actually come to in our place on the planet and the health of the planet, and how we've kind of formed a life-destructive culture, I would say, due to in one way of putting it, I think forgetting who we truly are, and
Well, Steve Jenkinson said some really interesting things about that in his books and some of the lectures that I've had the opportunity to either listen to or, as you know, sit down in when he describes it as a tumor, and it seems a little brash on the face of things, but really, it's growth at its own detriment. It's this endless growth, and that's just perceived to be normal. And it's, I wouldn't use the word confirmation bias, but the analogy of the frog that you put in the water and you slowly increase the temperature and slowly increase the temperature. We, as a generation, we get used to this new normal. And when the children are raised and inundated in that environment where endless growth and consumerism that's making it, man. That's a sign that you're really making it. There was also something that kind of came to me. It was from one of Alan Watts's books, where he talks about advances in one field are interlocked with advances in all others. You could not have penicillin or modern anesthesia without aviation, electronics, mass communication, superhighways, and industrial agriculture, not to mention the atomic bomb and biological warfare. He pointed to a story about somebody that said that he'd love to live in the end of the Victorian era, which I don't know. I've looked a little bit into that. I don't know that I'd want to live in the Victorian era, but he'd love to live in the Victorian era, but have penicillin. And unfortunately, that we have to take that good with the bad. And technology it's amazing. It create some very interesting opportunities, but I don't remember who it was that posed the question, is that necessarily a good thing? All these things that your iPhone does, it's absolutely interesting. It's amazing. I mean, you would have probably been stoned or burned at the stake a few hundred years ago for pulling out an iPhone 11, but is it necessarily a good thing? I don't know.
Well, we've gone straight into it, Chad.
Yeah, we're in the shit, man.
we're right into it. I quite like I like the fact that I'm glad we can skip talking about my career. Yeah. But the more I come, I mean, this is why because also I think part of the problem or the difficulty, but is that we can try and nail it, whether something's good or bad, or whereas deeply accepting, well, this is the path we have taken for whatever reasons, and there are a load of reasons, and it is good. I think it's really good to understand how it's happened rather than, like you say, accept that this is the way it is, this, because that's part of the nature of the culture we're brought up in, is that you feel that what we've put on top, this human world, what we've put on top of it is part of the natural world. This is the way it is. And it's so relative and it's so recent. Yeah. What we've created, and so not. And as this is the gift, part of the gift in these last 2 months of lockdown and the global pandemic, it's allowing us to see that there's a system there which can change really quickly. Yeah. That it's almost like helium. It's not made of, it's actually not part of the web of life's fabric. It's very much our own construction. And we can, and it's up to us, what we make of it. If we made it, we can undo it. That's why I think it's such a crucial time to be able to, like you say, to stop and take stock. It's like, I really deeply, it's been weighing heavily on my heart, I feel like I'm coming through into a lighter place with it. But a few days ago, it was like almost a dismay there that we might, come through this time and then just get back on. I kind of see it as almost like getting back on the Titanic, setting course for the same iceberg. Yeah. It's like we have a chance. And I think it's a reasonable analogy to look at the Titanic and what happened there and think, well, if those guys, even though they were warned, they knew it was coming as well. That was the kind of and it was ignored. The advice was ignored. But if they could now look back, I'm sure the captain would, I'm sure he'd take a different course. And we do have that opportunity in a sense to stop. And because, easily the majority of scientists are saying, some are saying it's kind of already too late to avert something deeply catastrophic. Yeah. And many are saying, like, the changes have to be now. By 2020, it's like 2025, huge changes have to be put in place, which means now, in order to avert something so huge and unknown and very, this virus it feels like a gentle gift to us, and it had to involve the threat to our lives and loss of life for us to be able to take the steps. How else would we take the steps we have had? So it's an extraordinary opportunity, and I pray that there's enough of a shift in enough of us to have stopped to really want to build new systems or to transform the ones we have from within and start locally. And because that's one of the big things. It's to come back to our land and our people and those who are around us, and ask what it is, what is it to be of the land in this place? And but it was a very important part in my journey, was because despite my that upbringing, with a lot of nature around me, I still left school. I still left school feeling kind of unprepared as a human, not in terms of my education, but in terms of my understanding of who I was, and I didn't feel equipped, with a certain knowledge of myself. I wouldn't have been able to put it that way, but yeah. But part of that was I wasn't told. I didn't have a link to my indigenous ancestors, to that kind of lineage, going back to before we were colonized. And I was taught the effects of that colonization, but from a kind of a glorified point of view, to the point where I had this underlying shame and guilt running through me. I didn't understand that at the time, but I understand now. I was just like the kind of wise, natural being in me was ashamed of what I was being shown, but I wouldn't have even been able to notice that was what was going on.
Right. Well, I mean, isn't that just the story of manifest destiny told in more subtle ways? We think about that, and I hate to draw. I shouldn't say I hate to, but it's a brash parallel to draw. But when we talk about overt versus covert racism, you don't see too many people walking around. I mean, maybe in the South of the United States, but actually, in the state that I'm from, Indiana, has the highest KKK member population density within the country. So, which, isn't representative of the particular town that I live in, but you go a little bit further south and you see it. But the point is, there's not a whole lot of folks walking around in white robes or with swastikas on their shoulders anymore. But you see that subtle racism that still pervades society at a emotional level with so many folks. But isn't this just manifest destiny by another name? When that adage of history is told by the victors, well, isn't that what we were just talking about with this endless growth? At what end? At what end? The people who took pause, the people who took that opportunity to maybe take some introspection on the way that they were living their lives and know and understand and properly live out upon being informed by limits. That's not the people that are writing the history books. Those aren't the teachers that are downloading all those agendas into our brains when we're young and informing the way that we live our lives. Is it not fair to say that maybe that wayward homelessness is perhaps derived from that by the people that were entrusted to teach us?
You mean, does it come from the same void, you mean?
Yeah. We're teaching from that void, I feel.
Absolutely.
That's how those people were raised.
No, absolutely. Which is, I think, where it's so important to hold to go way back and look at some kind of trajectory of an arc of how that, if you like, the fall happened. Not that there was necessarily a time of like perfect human where he was living in right relationship with everything. And also don't want to glorify the past, but some deep natural understanding of true nature has been so we've veered so far away from our place and an understanding of our place, and that it is like, certainly the whole of the Western world. It's like a colonized consciousness. It's like we've been colonized and allowed that to happen. We played our part in it, so it's not like I don't believe we've been taken over by something foreign. It was obviously within the human condition. So there's a journey that I still do trust the universal kind of nature of life, the web of life, and this journey that we're on. There's an arc, and we've come to a point in it. And here we are. It's these times have been prophesied for millennia from all traditions, and this part of what this virus is doing. For me, it's like I'm waking up. It's like, oh my God, this dream, this longing in my heart of a way where we could be on this planet together in relationship with the livingness of the sacred livingness of it all. It's like I'm sensing the potential, the possibility, the the real happening. There is a shift happening, like, and we're in it, and it's like, oh my God, because in some way I think the timeline in the climate ecocidal crisis that is kind of scientifically there still has time in it. It's still, which is part of the problem. There's still goals, to aim for, to save the planet. So part of me had kind of forgotten my deepest, if you like, deepest intuition, like at a cellular level, a sense that I've been born into a time not only when there is but when the huge shift is not only possible, but it's in our hands right now, and it's the most what an extraordinary time to be alive.
Oh, absolutely. There's there's so much there. So much there. There was. Do you know who James Lovelock is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm not going to be able to say I'm a huge authority on it. I've just when I've gone there, I've loved. I mean, James Lovelock was the Gaia books. Yeah.
And he was an academic. That's the other amazing thing, because it seems like we faction into these different categories of if you dip your toes in the water with any measure of agency or authority, all of a sudden you're part of the New Age or the New Age movement. And the other side of it is this new deity, which is science. And it's not to say that one of those is, like you said earlier, it's not black and white, man. The waters are muddied. It's not like science is all good or bad, or that this interconnectedness and appreciation for where we are positioned in nature is good or bad. It's that we swing this pendulum where you're one or the other, man. But James Lovelock was an intellectual that, like you said, came up with the Gaia theory. The idea, idea seems too neutral. The understanding that we are part of this world, and that the world has this energy that is emitted, and is informed by what we do as the apex species, at least in our eyes, the apex species of the planet. But one thing that he said that's been, I heard this quote from Stephen Herod Buhner, which I love his work. When I read his book on plant intelligence, in fact, it was Plant Intelligence in the Imaginal Realm, was the first time that I really, not from an intellectual, but from a true understanding perspective, started looking at the life of things outside of what directly impacts me and my ego. But one thing that he quotes James Lovelock quite often is, it wasn't until science convinced us that the world was dead that they could begin their autopsy in earnest. Yeah, and that's God. And this is, I do this almost ad nauseum. By the way, I pick apart these quotes from books, and I feel like some of these folks can say something in a way that it speaks for itself.
It's like we took the life out of life, and therefore,
once we turned it into a thing.
Yeah, and so this kind of given, I think there was just a natural, if you like, the greatest love affair, natural love affair ever, which was our one with life, our communion with life, our part in it, because it's the most extraordinary thing to be living, to be in body living in this planet, and that's what I feel is being called for. And the Gaia herself, it's like she's calling us back home, going, just
if there ever was a sign, ever was a sign, and you can see the ruffles and the feathers and what they look like respectively in the language. For instance, when I hear you talking about this as a tragic but obvious, palpable, not only warning, but opportunity, like you said. But then you hear other segments of the population, and what I worry for, but maybe I'm being pessimistic, but what seems to be the echoing consent is we just have to get back to normal. And whether it's that obvious and that intentional, as we hear from our politicians, as we hear from some of our thought leaders, it's also subtle in the language.
Yeah.
When just talking about going to the movies, man, when everything goes back to normal and we can go to the movies again, when everything goes back to normal and we can go to the restaurants again. Well, this, as you said, is an opportunity for us to, what is normal, and is that what is not only serving us, but serving everything around us that we have a responsibility of stewarding. So if that's the end goal, to get back to normal, man, we're gonna have to have a a follow-up conversation, and probably about 50 more, along with half the population, to get that out there. Because man, this normal is not what I'm trying to go back to.
No, certainly not. And I think we have to accept almost also that that's a certain, those systems and that energy, that colonized consciousness, that's all it will want to go back. That's what it wants to go back to. And it's also to see it for that. And not, this is just speaking personally, it's like this process I'm in right at the moment, it's like having to breathe deeply and accept that ain't necessarily just going to go away.
Right.
But there was a lot happening before the virus hit us. A lot of there's an awakening going on, I believe. And that had already started. I know there's some conspiracy theory saying the virus was thrown out there in response to the awakening that was happening. It's fair enough. Fair enough. It would, if there are dark. Well, we know that. Look, those dark forces are in us, and it's very clear. Power corrupts, and we have a system. We have a system that is full of that disconnection, that colonized, disconnected consciousness that is does not respect life at all. So that's not a conspiracy. That's the way it is. But it's in the architecture of our humanity as well. Yeah. So it's like having space for all that, but not pointing. For myself, it's like I find this kind of warrior rising up in me and wanting to defeat the enemy, and it's like the finger does. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't get out in the streets, because I think that's been a hugely important, especially for our young people, to be able to do that. It's been hugely important and continues to be. But it also was at the same time for me to keep, coming back to the really local, to myself, to, where is that, and what am I holding on to where in myself? What is it that what are the ideas I still have about myself and life and my relationship to it, and not feeling like I have to seek justice with the bad guys.
Right. Well, the bad guys in some people, in a varying degree, the bad guys are us. I mean, it's not so simple. It's not so simple as pointing a finger. It's not I don't believe there is a New World Order eyes wide shut party going on where everyone's conspiring, or there's a group of elites conspiring to undermine our society. But it's palpable as a species. I want to try and direct this to, because we can speak about these theoreticals and we can speak about this in metaphors, which I love, and you've coined some really good, profound examples as to what is going on, but what it is that you're doing to try and change.
Just to share with you, so just to bring it, if you like, down to a personal level of my own, my own experience, which also I feel in a certain way bound to and responsible to share at the moment. It's something I've only just started to share publicly, and but because which was in my mid-20s, I was before I'd kind of consciously, if you like, started seeking, trying to find out what the hell was going on with me and everything. I awoke one morning into this very vivid vision. So I came out of sleep, but didn't open my eyes, and there was a scene being played out in my mind's eye.
Okay.
And which was of huge kind of environmentally catastrophic nature, in which the world was cracking up. It's like this torrent of water was kind of picking up the surface world and pouring it down into the cracks in the earth. And my whole body was shaking, like at a cellular level. It was like recognizing. It was like this. I just knew that this was the time. This was coming in the time I'd chosen to be born. And there was, I mean, I was wailing. There was this release and grief coming out, and but it was like a deep remembrance. That's how I remember. It was a deep remembrance of this time, of these times. But which could sound like depressing, but here's the important bit, which is what keeps reverberating with me now, and it's almost, well, it's my practice, if you like, is that I found myself in a boat. This is wherever this vision, what my soul was showing me. It was like I was in a boat going with the flow of water, with other people, and I knew we were safe going with the flow. So we weren't resisting. And the message was, like, it just came through my whole body. It was like, there's going to come a time in your life where things get really shaky. And all you have to do is say yes. You just have to say yes to life. And it's like then these years, and I kind of came out and tried to get on with my life, and have been on many different journeys and adventures and self-discoveries. But it's like I think as the climate crisis grew over the last 10 years, emotionally, I think, stayed separate from the enormity of that vision and putting it together with what was actually approaching us here in these days. Until last summer. And actually it was just after I met you, and actually I think when we were working with Stephen Jenkinson, and I had a recall of that vision on the farm in Canada. And it was basically saying that time is now. We're going into it big time. And that froze me for a bit. I was like, oh my God, it's happening now. And it was very clear. I came back, and there's never been there has never been so much water in this country, I believe. I mean, and the fires in the Amazon in Australia were going off, and it's very clear. And I was frozen for a while. It's like I didn't know how to respond or what to do with myself. And then I happened to be doing a voiceover for a wildlife documentary, and there was a scene in it where this is set in Africa, and these elephants around this family. Well, most of the elephants in that part of Africa have gone to Botswana because they stopped hunting. So they naturally knew a lot of the wildlife is coming into Botswana, but the hunting lodges closed down the water holes. They stopped the pumps. So these water holes, which have been there for tens of years, for scores of years, suddenly were drying up, and they're in the middle of the biggest drought in the history. And there was a scene of an elephant surrounded by corpses in a dried up water hole, trying to suck some moisture out of this dried mud. And it broke me open. It utterly broke me open. And it was a gift. It was a gift that elephant gave me in it allowed the grief to start to flow just for the situation we're in and what we are already doing. And then it brought me back to the yes to life, because it's become clear to me, as I know this has become to many, the importance of grief, and that is actually, grief is is such a crucial part of our humanity, and the acceptance of life and death, but of love also, and love and grief, and love of life. Love of life and grief go hand in hand. And grief and being in touch with, almost like living with a broken heart, I have found, is part of saying yes to life. They come hand in hand. And without that flow and almost brokenheartedness and acceptance of these grief-sodden days, for me personally, that's where I feel also the loving response, the true response, and the action in a way comes from the right place, being in touch with my humanity in that way. But it's every day I'm asking myself, what is it to say yes? Just almost like a mantra, am I saying yes to life? And if I catch myself, trying to catch myself, I mean, in a sense, it's like it's a form of mindfulness. And it's like managing to catch yourself when you're going, just veering off out of your heart and into the monkey mind that wants to kind of nail everything down and close everything up and point the finger and cast judgment. So there's so many. It's like I feel that in the midst of what we're in, to keep the heart open, yes, in a kind of loving awareness, is the most important thing. And saying yes to life is the most important thing we can do right now, because it's going to help us like navigate these waters. And come back to the flow of life that we have veered away from. And I'm going off on one again.
No, you made a really, and I'm glad that you made it, because I wanted to get to that I think absolutely obligatory understanding of how grief and loss and endings and limits should inform and be, as Alan Watts said, the black and white. You can't have black without white. Without that we can't truly have that appreciation for life. And that's part of the, I think that that mentality of colonization is that grief is something that we're meant to get over. It's a period of brevity, and it's informed in the way that our grief counselors work, which are, I've had the opportunity to meet a couple really good therapists and psychologists that have a different mindset. But I think the theme is this people-pleasing customer service representative is what you're dealing with. And it's in the thread of our society, with, at least in the United States, with our sick leave policies and with our bereavement policies. You get, we put this finite number of, okay, if your aunt dies, you get 4 days. If your mom dies, you get, 7 days. Your kid dies, you get 14. And if your dog dies, you're shit out of luck, son. You better get to work tomorrow. But it's this understanding and expectation that grief is something that is meant to be conquered. Whereas, whereas it was, Steve said in an interview that, grief is the understanding or the appreciation of what you haven't yet lost. Or of love that hasn't yet been taken, and I think that's a crucial part of it that is not only overlooked, but it's seen as something to get past. And I really appreciate you bringing that out.
I appreciate you bringing Stephen up again, and it is worth mentioning that we are we're doing our best here to scrabble around and talk about this, and because it, like you say, it's just to have some compassion for our own colonized minds. And but that we are both lucky enough to have been learning with a wonderful man, Stephen Jenkinson, who speaks and writes, and his life is given to, certainly this is a large part of what he's given himself to, sharing from his life experience. So it's worth recommending him to everybody listening, if this conversation isn't making any sense, and if it's not making sense, definitely go to Stephen, because he'll make a lot more sense than we are. But I just want to flag him up, because there's nobody quite like Stephen, as there is, everybody has their own gifts and their kind of tapestry of experience that brings them to where they are, and Stephen has got quite a tapestry there in what allows him to share what he's sharing from his heart with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that from my mind's eye that I wouldn't feel as though I have the agency to articulate some of these things without having read some of his work, without having spent time on his farm with you and with such the wonderful people that we met. Because that's something that I've really engendered with podcasting is it's an opportunity to find people who can articulate the things that are in your head. And you brought this up earlier when you were in, I believe you said in your 20s, where you knew something was off, but you don't have the words to properly articulate. It's there, but you just can't get it out. It's on the tip of your tongue, and it's these elders and these people who have found ways to articulate it that maybe makes sense a little bit for you. And like you said, with Steve and the way that he writes and the way that he speaks, I think that can really shed some clarity into this and the times that we're in.
Most definitely, and I think Stephen is amongst, and he's, I think, of the rare kind of section of people in terms of coming from the westernized, colonized culture, who has really gone into his own. Well, he spent time with the Canadian Indigenous First Nation people there, and a lot of time around dying people and contemplate and storytelling, and that mixture. It's like, so I would put him amongst. There are many elders speaking now, people who have kept that lineage of their tradition and of their indigenousness. And for me, that's, if I'm going to turn to anybody, and as a species, those we need to be turning to our elders from those cultures that have kept that connection. And they've been telling us for hundreds of years, and especially over in America, it's like the wisdom that the wisdom that is inherent in their tradition of right relationship to Mother Earth. It's immense, and so what we need to listen to now. And it's like, well, who do we want? In all respect to it's like I wouldn't expect the people who are in our governments and the system that formed them and what they've had to come through to get into politics. Well, that's not the qualification. It's a qualification for something, but in terms of where we're at now, we need to be, our governments included, need to be humble enough to turn to our wise elders, to our wise indigenous elders who are still steeped in this natural wisdom. And it's there in spades. It's not like we don't have the solutions, because the solutions are in our hands and in our hearts and souls. And that's the good news. It's all there, and it's seeping through. And I know that's seeping through into our younger generation, not just our younger generation. So there is a wealth of wisdom there that I know is, that's one of the One of the good things about the global communication network that we have now is that that is able to spread really quickly.
Yeah. It's when the media is controlled, it's so easy to subvert people's opinion. But we are in a rare time and an unprecedented time where really you can know anything about anything with just a couple clicks of the mouse. But because of that, I guess, inundation of information, I think it's important to have a barometer as to what direction to look to. And you very well pointed out that these cultures and these nations that have been keeping the fire, that have been telling us the same thing for years and years and years, that there's something to that. Are you familiar with the Seven Fires prophecy?
I'm not deeply familiar. I've heard about it. How does that one go?
So the Seven Fires prophecy is part of the Anishinaabe culture here in North America that has been spoken through oral tradition for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. It was actually before the first European contact, when they prophesized that a light-skinned race would come to Turtle Island, to the New World, and that we'd be met with a choice. Or rather, that if the light-skinned race came with good intent, that there would be a blend of the two nations, and from that, there could be really good things that come out of that. But if they came in not so good of a light, it paved the way for destruction. And what that further translates to is a choice, a fork in the road, in which we choose to pursue this endless growth that has no limit, and we all know how that ends, or do we forge a new path? And yes, that time is here. That time has been here. It's not about the virus. The virus is it's a good right hook, because we haven't been noticing these little jabs over the years. And when I was looking up the Seven Fires prophecy on YouTube, the first time I had read about it in Arthur Haynes' work, which we had talked about off the air here, A New Path. And it just seemed remarkable to me that video by these indigenous nations had maybe a couple thousand hits, couple thousand views, and it'd been on YouTube since the inception of YouTube. It was like 2006 or 2007. But in contradiction to that, if you look at some of the rather depraved videos that pop up on YouTube, that's just it's just dripping with egocentricity, and those get millions of views within a couple of days. So if that's not how can we find
that video?
So I'll link that in the show notes, and then I'll send it to you as well afterwards. So it's about a 25-minute video, and there's some condensed versions of it as well, which I hate to say it that way, but we do live in a society of sound bites. And I think that that's part of it, is when you're living in the Twitter universe that's limited to 132 characters or whatever. It's really hard to get somebody to sit through which seems ridiculous, but it's really hard to get somebody to sit through a 25-minute video that's essentially giving us a blueprint as to how we can live in concert with the other inhabitants of this world that are non-human. So absolutely. So I don't know.
Well, let's get it out there.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Whilst I'm there, there's a book which I recently read that filled my heart up, and from First Nations lady called Robin Waller Kimmerer, and her book is called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful, she tells it in stories, and shares the wisdom of her tradition and the Haudenosaunee people as well. And it's one of the most beautiful books, and it's of our time. Medicine for our hearts, and also for like deep kind of nutrition, if you like, for how to act and our kind of reciprocal relationship with Mother Earth.
Yeah, and I just want to say for two cornbread white folks, this is not a closely guarded secret. These folks have been screaming from the rooftops as long as we've appeared on this scene.
Oh, God, yeah.
And it's right in front of us through the books that you and I have brought up, the YouTube videos, it's everywhere.
Did you know the average person spends 4 years of his life looking down at his cell phone? Kinda ironic, ain't it? How these touch screens can make us lose touch. But it's no wonder in a world filled with iMacs, iPads, and iPhones, so many eyes, so many selfies, not enough us's and we's. See, technology has made us more selfish and separate than ever. Because while it claims to connect us, connection has gotten no better. And let me express first, Mr. Zuckerberg, not to be rude, but you should reclassify Facebook to what it is, an anti-social network. Because while we may have big friend lists, so many of us are friendless all alone, because friendships are more broken than the screens on our very phones. We sit at home on our computers measuring self-worth by numbers of followers and likes. Ignoring those who actually love us, it seems we'd rather write an angry post and talk to someone who might actually hug us. Am I bugging? You tell me, because I asked a friend the other day, let's meet up face to face. They said, all right, what time you want to Skype? I responded with OMG, SRS, and then a bunch of SMHs and realized, what about me? Do I not have the patience to have conversation without a